Holy ones, welcome back to St. Catherine's online homily, which, by the way, some of you here at St. Catherine's have been asking, would the online homily continue after we have begun our first celebration of the Eucharist with a minimum of 65 people, which is 25% of our capacity here at St. Catherine's? The answer is yes, particularly those of you who are not going to be able to come, or more importantly, those of you who are staying home, being responsible both for your own health and for the health of those who would be high risk, irrelevant of age. The homily will be sent out as per usual, and Mass we will make one step forward and take it as it comes. Anyway, Pentecost is Greek for 50. It's the 50th day after the first Passover in Egypt. About a month and a half afterwards at Mount Sinai, God called the Israelites to be God's own people. That's where we get the term holy ones. Holy means set aside. The people are called to be God's own. They are to be different to the nations around them. Not in terms of being pious and self-righteous. That's not what holy means. Holy means set apart. Different. Different to the extent that one lives an ethical, responsible, honest, just, caring life. Not like some of those around one who are not guided by the Word of God and who don't always necessarily have, we'd say, good moral bearings. Now, mind you, those in the church are not the only ones with moral bearings, and they're not the only ones without them. It's a mixed bag. So is society outside the church. We're all made in God's image as people who know right from wrong. But sadly, we can be misled easily. 50th celebration of the 50th day rather, after the Passover, God entered into a covenant at Mount Sinai, calling the Israelites to be God's own people, to be holy, to be different. On that mountain, in Hebrew, by the way, the festival is still celebrated today as Shavuot. It was a harvest festival. And later, by New Testament times, it was most certainly understood by Judaism in general as a commemoration of the giving of the Torah, which is often translated the law, meaning the dictates, the principles, the moral guidance that God asks the people. You're going to enter into a relationship with me. I call you, but by so doing, there are responsibilities in this relationship. The covenant that most of you have entered is marriage. And it comes with responsibility for oneself, for each other, for children, for parents, for society. That's a covenant. It's not a contract which can be broken. A covenant is something that transcends legality. It is love, compassion, forgiveness, lived, relived. And this celebration of Shavuot, Pentecost, is a celebration of the renewal of the covenant. The renewal of the covenant then is the background to Pentecost, a renewal of a relationship with God, with the Israelites, except in the Acts of the Apostles, the passage here, the covenant now is going to be extended beyond the bounds of the nation of Israel. The symbols that are here are biblical. God came down in fire on Mount Sinai, surrounded by cloud. It's a common description of an encounter with God. Moses encountered God in a burning bush. It did not destroy, yet the fire was there. The fire that gives heat, warmth, and light. The other biblical metaphor is wind. Wind is ruah. Pneuma is the Hebrew and the Greek for breath. God breathed into the first human being, breathed God's own life. Without breath, we are dead. That is the term that's used for spirit. God breathed into humanity and brought about a new, rather breathed into the one made of the earth, meaning mortal, to earth we shall return. That's one point lying behind it. He breathed God's own life, a life that is destined for immortality, as is God, but it can be squandered and destroyed and lost, hence of the earth. The wind also is another example of an encounter with God, particularly in 1 Kings 19, where Elijah, fleeing from Queen Jezebel and King Ahab, who are out to destroy him, encounters God on a mountain. There was an earthquake, there was a mighty wind. God was in none of these phenomena. Instead, God was heard in the still, silent breeze, which of course means we have to learn how to listen. And that's very difficult, as probably you are finding out as you probe these scriptures. Something for some of you, you are not used to. It takes a whole new set skill of listening. The imagery here is not a literal description of what happened on Pentecost according to Luke. In fact, only 4 verses of this passage describe the biblical metaphors of wind and fire that come from Exodus and 1 Kings, both in chapter 19, by the way, in either book, in both books. The rest of the 7 verses describe the reaction, the response to this phenomena. Language limps. It tries to describe the indescribable. So the writers, Luke, in this instance, uses the language that was available to him, the Hebrew scripture, uses the language of encounter with God on Mount Sinai, on the mountain with Elijah, and so on. Anyway, broaden your ideas. This is not a newspaper article, otherwise you are in deep trouble. It's going to make little or no sense. And hence that's why some people reject it, because it doesn't make sense at the literal, crass literal level. To add to it, this was on the 50th day after the resurrection according to Luke. On this same Sunday, John's Gospel describes the giving of the Spirit, the outpouring of the Spirit, on the evening of that same day, the first day of the week. This is Easter Sunday. There are multiple ways of describing the same reality. Luke takes longer. He uses other biblical imagery to explain the reality of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, which involves our resurrection and ascension and newness of life, and as you will see from the Gospel, our commissioning as it was the commissioning of the disciples in Acts. One last point before I lose you and you all go for the coffee pot and never come back. The list of the nations here, there is no agreement as to why this list of nations. One possibility is, according to Raymond E. Brown, that the nations that are listed as the peoples in Jerusalem gathered for the celebration of Shavuot or Pentecost were probably the nations that the Jerusalem church evangelized, as distinct from the nations that were evangelized from the center of Antioch in and with St. Paul and Timothy and Titus and company. That's a possibility. Don't get excited about it unduly. The point is, there's a universalism, there's a broadening of the boundary and the embrace of God. It is a boundary beyond Israel itself, not excluding it, including it. Enough for now. Now you can go for your cup of coffee. You might need it, and we will look at it when you come back. Pause button, please. Get those Bibles which you are thoroughly used to using at this stage. See you in 10 minutes or 15 even. Take your time. See you. Bye. Welcome back, Holy Ones, meaning those of us called to be God's own people. Nothing to do with piety and self-righteousness, a far more wholesome thought. We're called to be different in the absolute best sense, to be moral, caring, compassionate, and to be open to life. The gospel is very similar to most of our experiences today. Locked up. We are behind the doors, and for fear as well, fear of contaminating someone else, fear of being contaminated with a life-threatening disease, fear of passing on coronavirus to grandchildren, grandparents, siblings, neighbours, friends, all these things. It's new for all of us. Consider within this context of confinement, fear, caution, also a term or two terms that are used in the Acts of the Apostles when this newness of life appeared among the early disciples of Christ. There was astonishment and there was confusion. In Luke's Gospel, by the way, there's always those two responses. Astonishment, isn't that nice? Or utter confusion. Now, if you are confused, you are in a very, very good place. You are in keeping with those in the scriptures. Without confusion, you are too self-assured. Time to continue the journey. Time to think outside the box. And the Acts of the Apostles talks about the Spirit of God putting new wind in their sails, for lack of a better term. The wind here is the Spirit of God, a new breath of life. You know, when this coronavirus, being locked up, if you are maybe an older person, it takes the wind out of us, meaning we stop living to the capacity and the degree we have been. Today reminds us that God working through the community of believers and non-believers too, but God working through humanity, but primarily here through the Christian community who acknowledge the ways of God and are constantly discerning them. God is breathing new life into us, breathing new wind into our sails, so that we can renew our commitment as this feast of Shavuot and Pentecost is. It's a renewal of being God's people. It's a renewal to be human. The humanness of this has to do with going beyond the confines of what we know, beyond the walls that have encased us and imprisoned us. Those of you who are my age, very noble one by the way, and older, I have been in contact with some of you, and I have learned that the best means of communicating is email. Some of you have hearing difficulties. Here is a challenge for those of you who have never learned to use a keyboard. It might save your sanity. It's a way to learn how to use a keyboard and a screen. You have gifts. We all have gifts. That's what the passage from Corinthians tells us. A gift is for someone else. It's not for me. It is something I can share of my wisdom, my life, my years, my experience. You can share your ability to play chess. You can teach your grandchildren how to play cards. You can teach them 1,000,001 things. Trust me, they are bored silly. They are looking forward to some kind of creative distraction. Do it. And I think that's literally what the gospel is saying. Do it. I've seen it on t-shirts and I often wonder, do what? Do it. Find out what the it is. We are told today in Corinthians, the passage from Corinthians, that we all have a gift, which is a manifestation of God's life, which is meant to build up and enhance the life of others. And it also helps us. It breathes new life into a situation where we honestly have given up and have thought, we're all doomed, or I'm doomed. We may have profound moments of isolation, loneliness, being away from the people who make us who we are, who enliven us. With new technology, that does not have to be so curtailing. That's one possibility. Grandchildren who are looking at me, bored, get in contact with your grandparents. Teach them how to use new technology. Call them if their hearing is not so bad. Possibilities. I would say to you, what can you do for someone else today who really would love to hear a human voice, someone to reach out to them? Here is God renewing a humanity that is inviting us beyond the confines we allow ourselves to be in unnecessarily. Walls don't have to confine us. Being alone does not mean we are isolated. Easier said than done. God, through the community, living the gospel, is saying, I encourage you. I am breathing new life into you. Embrace it. Jesus' first comment to the disciples who were locked up, all of us, was shalom, peace. He didn't come to condemn. He didn't come to say, oh, you're making a mess of this. You've made a really bad job out of it. You have not done well. You are dreadful children, god-awful parents, neglectful grandparents, etc., etc. No, he offers them peace. It's like a parent distracting a child or a parent even, who's having a tantrum. Distract and show other possibilities. The gospel, I think, is at that level. It's a call to renew our commitment to life. It's not over yet, and let's hope it won't be over for quite a while. It's a call to continue these relationships we have. When the gospel speaks about God breathing new life into us, it is in, with, and through the community that breath of life is encouraged, felt, and experienced. We're not zapped. There's no magic. It is a response to a call to be different, to be holy, and a call, in this instance, to change what we've been doing, to move beyond fear, to think outside the box, to embrace what maybe we dreaded embracing. One of them, for example, was me learning to speak to a camera. I have desisted that forever and a day until I had to do it. Here I am. I'm used to it now, I think. But new technology, us old people can do it too. Do the same. It's a part of reaching out. And in the reaching out, we're reached out to as well. It's a two-way street. Friendship always is. It's never one way. A little aside here about, the sins that you have the power to forgive or retain. Highly likely this refers to baptism, which is the initial primary sacrament of the forgiveness of sins, meaning continuing the mission of Jesus to bring peace. A peace that the world here means me. The world thinks only of itself. More walls, higher walls, let's not consider the needs of others, and so on. To welcome into a community people who are willing to walk with that community and be led by the gospel. They are baptized and welcomed, and the past is forgiven, as Christ has done here. We move forward. We cannot change the past. We can learn from it. But the question is, where are we going now? What do we see now? Living in the past is not the place to be. Learn from it. The other thing about sins that you retain, I think is the term, but, retain, or Matthew says what you bind or loose. In John's Gospel, when Lazarus was called out of the realm of the dead. He said to those bystanders, he said, untie him and let him go. We have the capacity to unbind people. We have the capacity to welcome, to loosen the knots in our own lives and the lives of others. We have the capacity to embrace life. Let bitterness, sourness, let these things go. You're destroying yourself. Life moves on. Move with it. The gospel today, I believe, is calling us to a renewed sense of this is not the end. And God is with us. We are sent to do as Christ did. Christ reaches out. We're called to reach out beyond confines, boundaries, mental, emotional, relational, that really can be inordinately curtailing, and very often because we're afraid to go and move into new territory. Or a better, idea would be, God is putting new wind in our sails to head for the high seas. Untie the ship of life. But it's not by oneself, it is with others. We'll be supported. We mightn't be at times by some. Some will always be support. Question for you now. What are you going to do before the sun sets in terms of do it? What will you do to renew a friendship, a relationship, a life that is really looking for renewal, and you will be renewed as well? This is living the spirit of Pentecost. It's a new world, a brave new world. Enjoy the doing and just do it. See you next week.